Now let's learn about what is scope in Python. So scope in Python is the area or the region of a program where you can access variables, functions and objects declared. The scope defines the accessibility of the Python object. So the objects cannot be accessed from anywhere in the program. Variables are not visible to the entire code, so their visibility can be restricted. Now scope verifies which variable to be accessed. A variable declared inside a function belongs to the local scope of that function and can only be used inside that function. Now whenever you use a name such as a variable name or a function name, Python will search through different scope levels or namespaces to determine whether the name exists or not. So Python resolves names using the LEGB rule. The LEGB stands for local, enclosed, global and built-in scope. Now talking about local scope, the variables which are defined in the function are called local scope of the variable. So these variables are defined in the function's body. Now talking about enclosing scope, now this scope only exists for nested functions. If the local scope is an inner or nested function, then the enclosing scope is the scope of the outer or enclosing function. Coming to global scope, the variable which can be accessed from anywhere in the program is known as the global scope. Such variables can be read inside or outside the function. Now the global scope is often implemented when we want to use the same variable name in the rest of the program. Coming to the final rule, which is B, that is built-in scope. So if a variable is not defined in local, enclosed or global scope, then Python looks for it in the built-in scope. Now this scope contains names such as keywords, functions, exceptions and other attributes that are built into Python. Now if you define the same variable name inside and outside of a function, Python will treat them as separate variables. So two separate variables, one available in the global scope that is outside the function and the other available in the local scope that is inside the function. Now let's head over to our Jupyter notebook and we'll try scopes in Python with hands-on demonstrations. Alright, so I'm on my Jupyter notebook. Let's start with our examples. First we'll look at local scope in Python. For that, I'm going to create a function called fun, and inside the function I'll create a variable called s which holds, let's say, an object called Simplilearn, and then I'm going to print the variable that is s. Now in this case I have defined my variable inside the function, so this becomes accessible only inside the function. Now if I call the function using the function name that is fun, and if we run it, you can see we have the message printed that is Simplilearn. Now we'll see another example. So suppose we'll try to access it outside the function, it will throw an error. So I'll just give a comment, try to access it outside the function. Alright, so again I'll create a function called, let's say, fun1. I'll give a colon, and here I'll say, let's say, s1 equal to Simplilearn, and now I'll give a comment here, print s1. Then I'll call my function fun1 and I'll try to print the variable s1 outside the function. So here s1 has a local scope since it is defined inside the function, but I'm trying to access the variable outside the function. Let's run it. You can see the error here, name s1 not defined. Now if I give a comment and run this, you see there is no message, and let me just remove this comment and print it. You can see we have the s1 variable message printed, that is Simplilearn. So this is how the local scope of a function works. Now let's see an example of enclosed scope, which is function inside another function. So I'll create a function, let's say func, and I'll use the variable this time s2 equal to Simplilearn, and then inside the func function I'll define another function, let's say func, which basically stands for inside function, and then here I'll say print s2, and we'll call the inner function, that is in func, and then I'll call the outer function. Let's run it and see the result. You can see here we have the message printed Simplilearn. I'll just edit this message, let's say welcome to Simplilearn. Now if I run this, you can see we have updated the message here. Now for the enclosed scope, you need to define an outer function enclosing the inner function like we did here, and you can also comment out the local variable of the inner function and refer to the variable using the non-local keyword. Let me show you an example around this. Suppose I have a global variable called msg. I'll say this is a global scope message. After that, I'll create a function. So I'll define a function called outer, and I'll use the same variable name, that is msg, and my message would be this is an outer variable. After that, I'm going to define another function called inner, and this will have the same variable, that is msg, and my message would be inner message variable. Now as I mentioned before, I need to comment out the local variable of the inner function, so I'll just comment this out, and then I'm going to say non-local, which is the keyword. So I'm referring to the variable using the non-local keyword. I'll say non-local variable name, that is msg, and now I'll print msg. We'll come out of the function and we'll call it inner. After that, we'll call the outer function, and then I'm going to print. I'll just scroll this down and we'll say msg. So here what we are doing is, so this is an example of an enclosed scope, so where we have defined the outer function enclosing the inner function, and we have commented out the local variable of the inner function, and we are referring to the variable using the non-local keyword. Now let's run it. You see here I have my two print statements working here. The first one is, this is an outer variable, you can see here, and then I have print msg, so this is a global scope message. Cool. Now we'll see an example of how the global scope works, though we have already seen an example above. So this was an example of a global scope. Now we'll see a few more examples around global scope again. Suppose I have a variable called s3 equal to, I'll say Simplilearn, and then I'll declare a function func1. I give a colon and then say print s3. Now I'll call the function func1 and will print it s3. If I run it, you can see here I have Simplilearn printed twice, so I have used the same variable name s3 inside the function. So this Simplilearn is for the local scope s3, that is this one, and outside the function we have printed s3 again, so simply learn twice. Alright, now let me show you another example about using the global scope. Create a variable msg1. Let's say my message is welcome to Simplilearn Python programming. I'll define the function func2. I'll give a colon, and I'll use the same variable that I used or declared above, that is msg1. I'll say this is the inner msg1 variable. Then I'm going to print msg1. After that, I'll call my function func2 and I'll print msg1. If I run this, you can see I have the two messages printed. First is this is the inner msg1 variable, and the second print statement will print the global variable message, that is welcome to Simplilearn Python programming. Cool. Now you can also use the global keyword inside the function to convert a local scope into global scope. Now I'll just give a comment using global keyword. So I'll define my function func, let's say 3. I'll give a colon, and using the global keyword I'll say s, and I'll say s equal to Simplilearn. Now let me call func3 and we'll print s outside the function. Now one thing to remember here, my variable has been declared inside the function, but since before declaring the variable I have assigned the global keyword to s, so this now becomes a global scope variable, so you can access it outside the function as well. Now if I run it, you can see it here. I have my message printed Simplilearn. If I say hello, you can see it, hello printed. Cool. Now we'll see another example of using the global scope. Let's say I have a variable called a1, which is India, and then I'll create a function called my country, and I'll use the global keyword and say a1, and after that I'm going to say a1 equal to, I'll change the country to, let's say, France. Now let me call the function my country and will print a1, and you can notice the difference in the result. So here initially I had defined India as a global variable, and after that I'm assigning the same variable name with a global keyword, and hence it will take the updated value for a1, and you can see here the result is France. Now finally let's look at built-in scope in Python. This is the final example in the demo session about scopes and arguments in Python. Cool. So this example is a bit different from the previous few examples that we saw on local scope, enclosed scope and global scope. So here I'm going to import Py from the math module. So I'll say from math import Py. So this example includes global scope, enclosed scope, as well as local scope, and of course we have the built-in scope as well. Now what I'll do is, first I'll give a comment and create a variable called Py equal to, I'll say global pi variable. I'll say this is a global pi variable, and then what I'll do is I'll say df. Let's do one thing. First of all, we'll remove the comment, and now I'll create a outer function. I'll give a colon and say the variable pi. I'll say outer variable pi, and then I'll create a nested function with the name inner, and I'll say pi equal to inner pi variable. Now I'm going to say print pi, and after that I'll call the inner function, and next I'll also call the outer function. Now if I run this, you can see the result, inner pi variable being printed, which is this print statement. Now what I'll do is I'm going to comment out the global scope variable, and I'll also comment out the first outer function variable that I had defined. I'll comment this out, and I'll also comment the inner function pi variable. Now if I run this, you see the result here. It prints the value of pi that was imported directly from the math module or the math library. So here pi is not defined in either local, enclosed, or global scope. So the built-in scope is looked up, that is the pi value imported from the math module. So this is an example of built-in scope in Python that uses inbuilt functions, modules, and objects that are available in Python.